hello. This is my unessay project. I'm doing a podcast with my two friends right here. They're also my roommates. You guys want to introduce yourselves like a little bit?
Hi, I'm Katie.
Hi, I'm Peyton.
And we are going to be talking about women's history, women's liberation, and the ways that formal and informal constraints have been placed on women throughout time, and just kind of going to have like an open discussion talking about, different points in women's history and kind of how that applies to us in present day, what it makes us think about. Honestly, anywhere the discussion goes, we're just going to roll with it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the new woman. After the Civil War, the new woman emerged, and so it was a new era for women. And what I have down here to describe the new woman is she emerged as a symbol of growing female independence, education, and public engagement in American society, challenging traditional gender roles and seeking higher education, entering the workforce, advocating for social norms, and participating in political movement. Have you guys ever heard of the temperance movement?
I don't think so.
I don't think I have either.
Yeah.
You guys don't know what that means? So the temperance movement was actually the movement for prohibition, and that was what a lot of women got involved in, because it was seen as like, protecting the home and the family and like all this stuff. And so a lot of the things that women were involved in, such as I have down the temperance movement, suffrage, labor rights, it was mostly limited to stuff that was seen as pro-family. Women, they could not directly be involved in politics and stuff, and so they relied a lot on unified women's movements, because politics was just seen as something that was inherently masculine. It was seen as no women's land, as like very much a boys' club. And so that's why they would come up with these unions, these movements. And I mean, that's a lot of what the suffrage movement was, like women just kind of coming together and using their influence, using their power in the only way that they can. So I'm going to introduce you guys to what was referred to as the working girl. And so this was kind of the era in which women, so many of them were unmarried, uneducated, and in need of additional income. There were lots of immigrants coming to this country, and so just waiting around to get married, that wasn't going to cut it. They needed more. They were still paid less than men. Many were still dependent on their families, and they desired the freedom to participate in fun things, but a lot of times because of the lower wages they got, they really didn't have those opportunities. I'm going to introduce you guys to the concept of treating. And so it's since women, they would make much less at this time, and a lot of their money would go to either supporting their family, supporting themselves. They didn't have the opportunity to go out and go to the movies like everyone else, go have go out, have a drink, go out, hang out with friends. And so treating was an era where these women, they would go and they would find men, every single night. It was referred to as treating. And they would go and they would have a man, and they would almost sometimes there was even a competitive era off of it. I remember one of the readings we did for class, and one girl was just like, oh, my guy's a chump, he only gave me so much. But this is a thing that they did. And I was gonna ask you guys, I was like, do you feel as if treating still exists in some forms?
Yes.
And I was gonna say definitely, because that's such a thing, people will go out and then you're like, oh, I wonder if I can get someone to buy me a drink. Honestly, hate to say it because it sounds so terrible, but it's a great money saver, So I was
and it's never the other way around too. It's not guys are going up to girls asking for a drink and stuff. So I feel it's very much still happening.
It's still
today,
exactly. And I was also gonna say is do you guys feel there's certain conditions that might bring it forth, cultural norms probably, so much.
Being broke.
Sexualization of women for sure. And then also I don't know if this would necessarily have a direct impact, but I know that back when treating was happening, it was women were making significantly less than men with the same or very similar jobs. And so I mean, we still do have the wage gap, and so I do wonder if that kind of plays into the cultural norms that kind of set up a system like that. But anyway, from this changing era of sexual morality, I wanted to transition to topic 3, but I'm not going to announce exactly what it is because I kind of want to get you guys on this. So when you first hear the term marriage hygiene, what would your guess be on what that means? Marriage hygiene.
Like a healthy relationship? I don't know. I have no idea what that means.
What I was kind of going to say, a healthy relationship, or like acting pure and good, like hygienic, like clean, I guess. Like.
So, if I told you that the term marriage hygiene was used in a Lysol ad, how would that change maybe what you'd guess it means?
Was it sold to clean women, like, to like clean their, can I say vagina on this?
Yes, you can say vagina. Yes, I might have told you about that before. Or
no,
like,
it's still, it's I think that still is a thing.
Oh, the Lysol? No, that is not sold.
No, it's not like sold anymore, but like I don't know, like people do weird things like to clean.
I know there's like douching. I mean, and that's essentially what they would do. So marriage hygiene refers to, it was in 1933, there was an advertisement for Lysol. And it was advertising it for uses of marriage hygiene. And what that meant was birth control. They were advertising using Lysol as birth control. Marriage hygiene. And so they would tell women to dilute some Lysol in some water and then douche themselves with it. Like shoot it up. Shoot it up there as a way to prevent pregnancy. And like, duh, this didn't work. Like, obviously this didn't work. But
throw off your pH.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I can't imagine that would like, just sounds completely painful, completely counterproductive. And I bring this up because the reason why they had to do these things were because of these little things called Comstock laws. And I don't know if you guys have heard of them because they are still on the books, by the way. Although they've been kind of like invalidated, made like void by a lot of like different legal cases. So they really don't have much power anymore. But the Comstock laws were a set of U.S., federal, and state laws passed in 1873 that banned the mailing and distribution of obscene materials, including contraceptives, abortion information, and porn. So it's like talking about birth control and like abortion was seen as just as obscene to these people at this time as porn. And so when they were advertising stuff for like birth control, they had to use words like marriage hygiene because they couldn't insinuate that, you know, an unmarried woman would, God forbid, would like want to have sex, which, you know, as the norm was changing and as like, you know, the demand for these products and these ads shows is that like, no, it wasn't just married women that wanted to have sex. And like, it was all women that wanted to have sex for enjoyment, and it wasn't just something for reproduction anymore. There was a growing demand for birth control because of the changing face of modern sexuality, and it created just this just mass market of stuff. And so in order to advertise these products, they had to use words like marriage hygiene, or else the Comstock laws were gonna, you know, they were gonna violate those laws, and then they could go to jail. And so I'm gonna introduce you to, you might have heard of her, Margaret Sanger. She was an American nurse, birth control activist, and sex educator. And she founded the first birth control clinic in the United States. And she played a very key role in challenging the Comstock laws, promoting reproductive rights. She didn't want women to be, you know, stuck in the confines of marriage. Because she would see all these women who would be married for years and just, you know, have like 8 kids or something. And they just simply couldn't do it anymore. They didn't have the time and the money. And also, this was, I mean, she did this over like, you know, the span of a couple decades, but in the 30s, like when the marriage hygiene ad came out, that's in like the Depression. And so these women with like 8 children that are getting pregnant, like even married people at this time, they couldn't have another kid. And so many of these women too would either nearly kill themselves or kill themselves going to back alley abortionists.
So terrible.
And, you know, either sometimes they try to do it themselves. Like several women died because of that. And, you know, just kind of what this, like, era represents is, you know, how the restriction of birth control and abortion just keeps women trapped in the confines of marriage, makes them so they have no other opportunities other than finding a husband and just birthing babies for him. But it also shows that women wanted sex for more. They didn't just want to have sex to make babies. They wanted to be able to go out and enjoy themselves. This brings us to World War II, Rosie the Riveter, and post-World War II femininity. So this is topic 4. Okay. And so you guys know what Rosie the Riveter is, right? We learned about her in school and stuff. It was an advertisement for women to join the war after all the men were away at the war. You know, they wanted women to get in the factories, work these men's jobs, create all the equipment, the airplanes, the weapons, like all the stuff that men were previously doing but were now overseas, you know, fighting in the war, and they couldn't do anymore. Fun fact, Marilyn Monroe was discovered working in a shop when she was Norma Jean, her original name, and she was putting propellers on radio-controlled planes.
did not know that.
And so it was like they had everyone. Like if we were in this era, we would be in those shops, like you know, cutting steel to make planes, you know, working on boats and stuff. We would be there. And so that's kind of, you know, the more common, you know, form of like women working during World War II is being seen as like a patriotic thing. Like that's kind of what people usually think of. But I'm going to be talking about the 3 Men and the prostitutes of Hawaii. So this was my favorite reading that we did. I thought it was absolutely insane. I think I did talk to you about it in Hawaii, and you know how we had like a lot of military operations going on in Hawaii, like you know everyone knows about like Pearl Harbor. So it was kind of like a place where a lot of these servicemen would come for a little bit and then be shipped off to somewhere else, you know. And so in Hawaii, although prostitution was illegal, government officials like very much turned a blind eye and like regulated its practice. This is the craziest part of it. So, prostitutes made between 30 and 40K a year. And so keep in mind, this is in like the 40s. 30, 40K a year. And the average working woman at that time made 2,000. And the madams, the people that ran these brothels, they made 150 to 450K a year. And I wanted to ask you guys, how much, so the average working woman, how much do you think $2,000 would be worth in today's money? So this is the average woman.
Maybe like 50,000?
Yeah, I would say like 30, 40K. Like
yeah, you got it. It's $35,000 approximately in today's money. And how much do you think? So this is the bottom end of what a prostitute would make, 30K. How much do you think 30K would be worth?
A lot. Like be like like 500.
Yeah, you're right on the ball. It's $530,000.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So they were making $530,000, and then 150K, so this is the bottom end of what the madams were making. How much do you think that would be worth? So running a brothel, this is what they were getting paid for.
Like $1 million a year.
Yeah, like upwards.
Yeah.
2.6 mil.
That's crazy.
Wow.
And then 450K. I'm just gonna tell you guys, like I won't make you like guess it again. Approximately $8 million.
That's insane.
So these women were like, you know, it is kind of like you have to balance with like what they had to do. They had to, you know, like do sex work, which is not like, you know, pretty appealing, like not something that people usually like be like, oh, you know, I want to grow up and be a prostitute. But that's a lot of money for that time, and especially in a time where it's like, you know, women's freedoms were like slowly evolving. It's like, no, these women, they had the supply, they had the demand, they had the money, and they made the rules like about what was going on.
And do they get to choose to do that? Like, yeah.
They had to choose, like no one was like forcing them, and like they could go home when they wanted.
Oh,
and
really? They could stop whenever they wanted?
Like they weren't like trapped in there. Like, like as I said earlier, like a lot of these girls were from like the West Coast, like California. Like they would usually go back after like 6 months or something. Like, you know, and sometimes they'd return, I'm pretty sure, and like, you know, do like a couple things, but no, they were like honestly like pretty free, other than like these rules that they had, but at the same time they were also the ones making the rules, because these men were like there's a reason why they call them 3 Minute Men. This is crazy to me. They would see 100 men a day, and usually they did have a quota, so that kind of sucked, is that they were forced to see like 100 men. However, they had like a time limit of 3 minutes. So the men could only, that's why they're called 3 Minute Men, is that they would charge $3 for 3 minutes.
How much was this $3? That's a lot of money back then, I bet.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Like 20 to 50 bucks or something?
I would love to look it up, honestly.
Like 60. It's like a little under 60 bucks.
What the?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean.
That's crazy.
Yeah, having sex with someone for 60 bucks does not seem ideal. Just the fact that they had so much demand, these men would line up around the block for 3 minutes, for $3 3 minutes with one of these women, and they controlled exactly, yeah, and they controlled access to these brothels. They would turn men away, and they would tell drunk men, "I don't think you can make business," meaning that like I don't think you can like get it done in 3 minutes, and so. And oh yeah, and it wasn't even like a nice bedroom. They would wait in these long lines for hours just to be put into a cubicle on a cot. With like dividers, so it wasn't even like a room, you know.
It was like the Amsterdam, what's it called?
The red light district.
Yeah, the red light district.
Is that what they do? They just have like
it's a tiny, tiny little room with like just a bed.
Really?
And yeah,
that's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
it's still around, I guess. Like those cubicles.
No, exactly. It's you know, and at the same time, it's like, you can kind of say the same things about, like, women of the red light district that you can about, like, these women in Hawaii, where it's like, yes, it sucks, but think about, like, the freedom they have and, like, their job and, like, flexibility.
And from my understanding, I think they do get paid there pretty well.
Yeah, no, I bet. That's what I've heard.
They also get, like, a lot of tourists, but that makes it better.
Exactly.
They did that.
Because, like, people, do it just for, like, to say, I don't know, it's kind of a thing, which is kind of weird, but still, like, it probably brings more business.
It's like the same thing. It's like they got the demand.
Yeah.
They've got all these people that, you know, waiting in lines to go experience it. After the war, women were expected to give their jobs up to the returning soldiers. Not that one, though. The soldiers did not want to be prostitutes. But a lot of women had come to love their jobs and the freedom that had come along with it. And so, yeah, it was kind of a really sad era for them. And a lot of women, you know, had become extremely skilled and gifted in their jobs. And unfortunately, after the war, even though they had to give up their jobs, they would go out and look for, like, you know, replacements, and no one wanted to hire them because they were women. And during the post-war era, there was the little communism scare, the Red Scare, and there was a lot of abundance, though, and the family unit was very much seen as, like, the stability and, like, the source of stability, prosperity, and this kind of, you know, spurred, like, a little bit of, like, a conservative movement, like, you know, pushing for women to, like, you know, during the war, it was so encouraged for, like, women that it was, like, patriotic for them to go out and, you know, participate in the workforce. But now it was seen as, like, their patriotic duty to stay at home, be good wives and mothers, and be super domestic. And so Miss Betty Friedan, who, she was an American writer, activist, and co-founder of the National Organization for Women, and she wrote a book in 1963 called The Feminine Mystique, and it went, like, the equivalent of, like, stuff going viral today. And so it was basically challenging this post-World War II ideal that women could find fulfillment solely as wives, mothers, and homemakers. And this was a concept that she coined and called the feminine mystique. And she argued that many women felt unfulfilled and, you know, limited in these roles, you know, confined in the family. And this discussion, honestly, was just, like, a huge spark for the feminist movement. And so we know that things such as, like, Roe v. Wade, that was passed in the 70s. You know, that court case was in the 70s. This was kind of, like, you know, the spark that, like, lit that flame. You know, women were starting to realize that it's like, wait a minute, like, why are other people defining their roles for us? Like, we deserve, you know, to not just, you know, have to feel like as we have no other choice than to just get married and, you know, that's kind of it for our lives. We have no other aspirations. Women were just getting fed up with that. And her book, like, it was a huge hit. Like, everyone had read it. And that kind of, you know, just gave that movement that little spark. Topic 5, we're going to talk about second wave feminism and the world after Roe. So this is, and I don't mean after Roe as in, like, 2022, like Dobbs' decision that overturned Roe. I mean, like, the era in which Roe versus Wade happened, and, you know, women now have the constitutional right to abortion protected through the 14th Amendment, and it was a time of just, like, completely changing expectations for women, because, you know, women were able to build their lives without, you know, fearing that, you know, having a baby was out of their control. They could, like, rely on these things and be like, you know what, like, I can make all these decisions about my life, and then when I want to have a baby, I'm going to choose it. During this era, women were getting divorced. Several discriminatory laws and practices were taken down. There were these organized movements, formal limits on educational opportunities undone, such as Title IX. Everyone knows about Title IX. There's that women began to question societal norms that confined them to the home and denied them opportunities for professional growth. And it took place alongside many major civil rights struggles and anti-war, you know, protests and everything. Like, everyone always has heard about, like, the hippies, like, being, like, anti-war, you know, free love. It was just an era of, like, massive change of people, you know, challenging things that for so long had just been, like, accepted as a normal part of reality. But yeah, despite the progress of all this, sex discrimination still did persist. And obviously, like, we still see stuff like that today. Like, there still does exist, like, a wage gap when you compare, like, you know, women to men, and also, like, amongst, like, the races too. There's still, like, you know, significant inequality in our society. However, this was kind of the era when people really started to question that, and it became, like, a huge movement. And so we can see how this was the era that Roe happened and everything, how kind of, like, you know, all these social movements that were happening around it very much, you know, it makes sense. Like, for the first time in people's lives, they're like, you know what, we don't have to be married to have sex. And from that comes, like, wait, we need contraception and abortion available, or else, like, this is going to completely, like, uproot our lives. Like, you know, they kind of just, not wording it well, but they go very much, like, hand in hand together, these two things. And, yeah, in the 1970s, which I'm pretty sure is 1973, Roe versus Wade, the case that, you know, made abortion a constitutional right. It gave women the freedom to pursue careers, education, and personal aspirations without being bound by the traditional expectations of motherhood. And they could build their lives with the expectations and guarantees that they had reproductive autonomy, and they didn't have to feel as if, like, motherhood and marriage were a burden. They were able to choose to do those things when they wanted to do those things. That kind of brings me to my last question for you guys. Is there anything about, like, this era or, like, any of the eras we talked about that really, you know, rings true for the world, like, today, and, like, your own personal experiences?
I think a lot of things that you talked about are still relevant today.
Yeah.
I think the treating was particularly silly. Like, relevant today still. So I guess the push for, like, women to enter into the workforce, I think, like, now, I guess doing, like, STEM, there's such a push to, like, put women into, like, that sector of the workforce now, because, like, there's so few of us that do it. And, like, even, like, working, sometimes I would kind of feel like the repercussions of there being very few women, like, the only girl in a meeting, that kind of thing. So I guess, like, I don't know, promoting STEM for girls, it's kind of, like, adjacent to, like, the Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, no,
that
totally.
makes any sense. But
It's like women find enjoyment in doing those things.
Just exactly.
As much as, like,
just as men do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say just, like, I feel like we're growing so much as a society in that direction with, like, it's, like, it's not over yet. I feel like there's still, like, many things that, like, you know, that people are pushing for right now. And even just, like, I think, there'll be, like, one win, and then we go to, like, the next, like, topic. And I don't think this is, like, that big of, like, of a thing. I don't really know much about it, but even, like, women's sports be taking more seriously and stuff. And just, like, everything, like, within that sphere, I feel like we're just, like, growing more and, like, getting more bases covered, I guess.
Yeah, their salaries are getting better.
Yeah.
And I heard, like, the other day, like, these guys were talking, and they were talking about, like, I think it was the WNBA draft, and they were genuinely, like, excited. Exactly. And I was like, I was so shocked, honestly. Like, I heard that, I was just like, wait a minute. Like, they're talking about, like, these women athletes, like the same way that they talk about male athletes, and that's just something that I've really never, like, I was so shocked. I didn't realize that I've never heard it before, but I was like, no, they're, like, excited about this. And, you know, I definitely think that that's, like, a huge, huge example. And, you know, I do think it is relevant to bring up, like, you know, that Roe v. Wade has been recently overturned, and now, you know, these things that we were talking about, like, during the second wave of feminism in the 70s and 80s, like, a lot of those things, like, who knows what's going to happen if, like, women are not able to, you know, build their lives around the guarantee that they're not going to be forced to have a child, you know? And, like, I think it's
backwards. It's
exactly.
Like, why, like, pour your heart and soul into your career when it could get, like, snatched?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and, like, I just think about how many, you know, women are going to end up, you know, just as we've seen, it's like as women gained more rights and more opportunities outside of marriage, more autonomy, you know, became more liberated, you can see how, you know, they just were able to dream of possibilities that weren't just marriage. And I feel like now, like, if we take away this reproductive freedom that women have and we don't allow them to choose whether they're going to have a baby, like, women could become, like, super dependent on, like, marriage again. And they could, you know, women could be having, like, a ton of babies that they just don't have the time, energy, or money to support, and just feel like, you know, they have to because they don't have any other options. And I think that that's really worrying, especially when we look at the grand, you know, scheme and, like, scale of, like, everything that's, like, happened in these, you know, since we began with the New Woman to, like, you know, second wave feminism to now. We just think about all the progress that has been made, and we see how, like, these specific things, like, truly do impact women's lives. It's just scary to think about. I really think so. But anyway, that brings us to the end of this. It is way longer than I intended, so I hope that it's, you know, I hope that that's all right, but I thank you guys for joining me today. I think we had a great conversation, and I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, that's a wrap. Bye, podcast.
Bye.